Welcome to Season 3 of Always Authors, the literary podcast that presents two authors in candid conversation. On this episode, we're excited to bring you New York Times best-selling author of more than 30 books, Virginia Kantra. Virginia's most recent novel, The Fairy Tale Life of Dorothy Gale, a contemporary story inspired by The Wizard of Oz, was just released this week. Virginia is in conversation with her longtime friend, Sonali, USA Today best-selling author of numerous Bollywood-style love stories. Among many accolades, Sonali was deemed the best romance writer from the American Library Association and was listed for the Dublin Literary Award. Virginia and Sonali will take you on a wild ride through Oz in their discussion on Frank Baum, self-worth, suffragettes, and the importance of men who can cook. Inspiration starts now.
Hi, Sonali.
Hi, Virginia. It is so great to see you. I am so excited about this conversation and to talk about everything.
Well, I am thrilled that you were free to join me today because for people who don't know us, we have a long friendship. I remember the first time we met at a writers' conference, maybe in the bar. And you were so warm and lovely. And I had already read your first book, The Bollywood Bride. And I just thought you were so talented. We were both up for awards last year. And I was like, I want to be your friend. And
wish granted.
And now we are friends. And I think when you're a writer, that's such an important part of your life because we live in these little cubicles of creativity and paranoia.
Yeah, well, tell me about it. And I remember really distinctly our first meeting because you were Virginia Kantra and I was unpublished Sonali. And I remember it was a little pre-awards reception because we were both nominated. And I remember you coming up to me and very graciously saying you had read my book and all of that. And I was, it totally blew me away. But I remember my eyes straying to your lanyard and your badge. So this was a thing at that conference where people had like really loaded badges with all the pins from, various other awards and things like that. And you had about, 20. Your entire badge was full of pins from previous nominations and wins. And my eyes, I think, just kind of went round like they're going right now. And I was like, wow. And I was looking straight at your boobs. So then I quickly apologized. I'm like, wow, that is impressive. But I'm sorry, I'm staring, and you said, you looked me flat in the eye and you said, go ahead and look, honey. This is the only time of the year where there's something to look at down there. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be her friend forever. And since then, this was, I think, more than 10 years ago, and we have since our friendship is so incredibly precious to me, and we talk almost every day, so the listeners know. We're continuously texting, and so in this very, very lonely world of trying to create stories, you are very much always holding my hand, and I feel so blessed about that, and I'm so excited to share that with the listeners.
Well, you've always been all those things for me, I think, especially during the pandemic. Oh. And with the book that's coming out December 5th, The Fairy Tale Life of Dorothy Gale, you were even more that for me because you were an amazing, not in addition to the usual hand-holding and brainstorming, you were also an amazing resource because The Fairy Tale Life of Dorothy Gale is a reimagining of sorts of the Wizard of Oz. And I gender flipped the Cowardly Lion as a Punjabi Sikh British young woman named Riti Kaur. And you held my hand again and kind of talked me through everything from pronunciations to uh, family interactions, and also I think gave me some of Reedy's loving fierceness, which I think is part of your character.
Oh my
So
gosh.
that was absolutely wonderful.
That's so sweet. And I think, those conversations are long, long conversations while we both took walks during the pandemic, to kind of get into Riti and, and Dee and, and those two incredibly interesting men who we will talk about more. But it was, such a part of my day and so important. Now, I will say, I'm not Punjabi and I'm not Sikh.
No,
And having said that, I have very close family, and I've lived in Punjab because my father moved around all over India, and the one thing I will say with some confidence that I'm sure I have not gotten wrong is the pronunciations. So at least that the rest
and
of
you
it we
did
do our
check
best.
stuff. You did check stuff for me because you had
Yeah.
people in London
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you could run things by for me, which was incredibly helpful.
Yes, and you
Um,
were. I love that you were so focused on on that, because I remember speaking with my friend who is actually Sikh Punjabi, born and raised in London, and there were parts where she was a great resource for you and for us with this story, but there were things where I was like, no, we're not, we can't, that's not how we can do this. And you were absolutely, so exactly how you should have been, which was that I'm absolutely focused on getting this right in terms of tone and not taking the easy way out, which is often, the easy way out. So let's come back and talk about the fairy tale life, and Dee, and where that story came from for you. And we've both written retellings of classics. We've both I've written four novels.
so
This is
you
your third. I've written four novels with Jane Austen, my four favorite Jane Austen novels, and you've done Little Women, both Beth and Amy, and Megan Jo. Yes. Brain fart. But so this again is your third overt. I think we're all influenced in our work often, but your overt retelling. So tell me about I had the Wizard of Oz, for me personally, was obviously the movie. I don't know that the book was ever anything. Is there an tell
there
us.
is okay. So the original book came out in 1900. It was
What?
the great American fairy tale. So the movie, which is in 1939, everybody's familiar with it because it was broadcast on TV for more than 30 years. So I remember watching it with my sister in the living room with our parents. And whenever the witch came on, I would run into the kitchen and hide until she was gone. I mean, so I could hear her, but I didn't have to see her. And then I would sneak in. But the book was actually one of the first chapter books I read, and I loved it. And you and I think, have talked about the stories that formed us,
Yeah.
and I think the Jane Austen books are that for you.
Yeah.
And I admire you so much for taking them on because they're like I don't know that I have more to say about Jane Austen's stories. So it is interesting when you approach a a retelling, or if you're inspired by one of these stories that shape you as a writer, as a woman, as a person. What is it that? How do you find your way into the story? And the way I found my way into The Wizard of Oz was indeed the character of Dorothy Gale, or for the movie watchers, Judy Garland, because she's not, on the face of it, a very prepossessing heroine. She is either a prepubescent farm girl from Kansas with no magical powers of her own, or she's a cute girl with a kind heart and kick-ass red shoes, um, who stumbles quite inadvertently into, either she gets hit on the head and dreams the whole thing up, or she does indeed go to this magical kingdom. But what she is she's an ordinary female character. She's like the every woman of the story, and she has to make her own way. She has to negotiate a hostile landscape on grit and kindness. And for me, that was a really important thing to focus on. And part of that original Baum story, and we should talk about this at some point, he was actually married to the daughter, Frank Baum was married to the daughter of one of the original suffragettes in the United States. And in their marriage vows, it was noteworthy enough that the paper noted that the bride's vows were exactly the same as the groom's.
Wow.
So the usual obey stuff didn't come in. And if you look at The Wizard of Oz, the books or the movies, all the people of real power are women.
Which is such, such a rarity. We've been talking about influence, right? And then why these particular books? And we are, we're women of a certain age, even though
I'm of an agier more than
an
you,
agier age than me, but I mean, I think, for context, I'm 51, grew up in India, but why these particular stories, right? Why are we so drawn, I think, to these particular stories? And for me, I can say that I was in middle school, and everything I was reading, and of course, thanks to colonization, I was being educated in English, lived in this very anglicized bubble. So the reading, school being in English, most of my reading was in English. I was also surrounded by Bollywood and stories my grandmothers told, and my all of that. So it was a mix, but across the board, whether it was Western literature which I was reading, or the Indian epics and Indian literature that I was consuming, there was a real, I think, dearth and almost almost complete absence of female protagonists, especially female protagonists who asked for things, desired things, demanded things, and got them. Right. So if you first there weren't any. We were following all these men doing these heroic things in history, on screen, on the page, all of that. And if not that, then if there happened to be a woman who took up more than a page on the paper, she was written where sacrifice was glorified, perfection in what you do for others. The supporting role was always glorified. I had not, until I think I came across Lizzie Bennet, come across a woman who, who kind of, was that opinionated, who didn't pander to society, to the aunties, to be liked by men, whose, being chosen wasn't the thing. And, and she was literally loved for her opinions. And it completely blew my mind. She dared to want things, and she got them. That is the even bigger thing. She wasn't, the story didn't exist to teach her how she was wrong to want things, how she was wrong to cross boundaries, how she was wrong to reach for, things. She actually did those things. She also did the work, to become the person, who was a better person than when she started. She did that work. So it wasn't like, but the thing she wanted, which is to be loved for who she is, to spend her life with somebody who was worthy of her, was a thing I had never seen on the page or in stories around me. And it completely made it okay to be me, because we all grew up having some natural sense of self-worth, because that's the human condition, right? Nobody's born thinking I suck and I shouldn't have things. And and so I think women, at least up until my generation, were taught to systematically crush that through stories, through everything we were hearing about ourselves in the world. And it is stories like this, in the world around us, that resonated with our natural need to matter, right? And I think for me that changed who I grew up to become. And that's why those stories are important. And I had never really actually thought about the fact that The Wizard of Oz as a movie back then might have been one of the few where it was centered around a young girl. Now, I think, again, Wizard of Oz I watched for the first time probably at the end of elementary school. And totally boring, off the, unrelated story is Our Neighbor. This is the time when the VCR had just come to India. It was not shown on Indian television, but the VCR had just come to India. And Our Neighbors, my best friends, like my neighbor friend's uncle worked in Nigeria, and he had come back with a collection of VCR tapes, videotapes, and one of them was The Wizard of Oz. So we watched it over and over and over again at the time, and and there was a little bit of, oh, what is going on here? Because it was the 30s in America, which was very removed from the 80s in India, and all of that. But you're absolutely right. The idea that, and also I love how it's so off its time, because behaviorally and all of that, the kindness, the sweetness that is expected of girls and all of that, Dorothy does embody. And yet, so being badass with that, within a context, isn't that something that is like stories we grew up with? So tell me about that.
Well, I think there's that, and I think there's also this sense. I was an English major, so when I'm reading books as part of my curriculum, as a young academic person, you read about women, and they can even be protagonists, but what you learn is they fall into unhealthy relationships and then have children out of wedlock and have to wear a scarlet A on their chest. Or they have okay sex with miserable men and then throw themselves under the train. And so
exactly.
Yes, thank you, Anna Karenina. So I think, or Jane Eyre, who I idolized for years, and yet when you actually look at it from in the context of the power differential and the fact that he's her employer, so thank God for Jane Austen, say I.
Yeah, but even with Jane Eyre, because I've thought about this, because also my grandmother was a huge fan of Jane Eyre. Like, this was, every afternoon, summers when I spent with her, like I would cuddle up with her and she would tell me the story of that Mr. Rochester. She was completely in love with Mr. Rochester. Like, that was her ultimate hero. And so I grew up with this, and I always thought it was a very, very sad story. And but I think in retrospect, the fact that that story is about right and wrong in a very moralistic, religious way, I think, to tell you what a good woman should be and what morality is. And so it's very interesting. I think that's a piece of it. But having said that, with all his power dynamic, she is someone who is able to say, no, this is my...
She is his only equal. And in fact, her insistence on her moral truth actually pays tribute to his first wife because she will not ignore the existence of his wife in the attic,
Yeah, that's that whole sanctity of marriage and goodness, and what makes us in the eyes of God a good, good morally upstanding person. But I digress. But the fact that her life will hugely improve if she allows this man to bully her into a marriage, that he feels is his right, and probably in today, outside of the context of morality, it is. And I think that that the fact that she is so conditioned by the rules of her time, whatever the reasoning, she is able to say that this makes me a lesser person and I will not do it, and walk
I
away.
think she stands up
Yeah,
to him.
yeah.
And that was actually another part of the Wizard of Oz story that kind of drew me, because so there were two poles that tugged me. First of all, I was writing during the pandemic. Now, when were you? Yeah. Was it the Vibrant Years or Lies and Other Love Languages that you were writing, like in that time when you and I were texting each other and zooming and going, "This is bad."
It was Vibrant Years. It was Vibrant
Yeah.
Years and the last of the Austen books, which is the Emma Project. I kind of wrote those during the. So I had a very productive pandemic, which is, and I don't mean that insensitively. I mean that as as that level of becoming internal, and I was able to do it in a very healthy way. To stop running around. I was literally running around like a headless chicken all through 2019. We traveled, like, I think 365 days of that year, and I just kind of totally broke my own social capacitor. And I think by the time that you can't leave the house came, it was not for me personally. I understand the large scale tragedy of it, and even today when we look back to the time, how terrifying it was to not have any idea. Now we have hindsight, but we had no idea where any of this was going, right? And we could have all just been dead. That was a very real possibility. And so all of that notwithstanding, I think the sitting and kind of thinking about what it means to be me, what it means to be human, what it means to not run around, and to kind of just internalize, all of this fear and all that. It was kind of the experience for me is my writing really was was the rope. My writing and my writing community, which is you, was what was the rope that I held on to while we were all in that dark well. So I
Well, I think your writing was indeed, from coming out of that, was very vibrant. I was finishing up Beth and Amy, and then I started this book. And where I really connect to the movie is there is an iconic scene where Dorothy, who has now her little gray Kansas farmhouse, has been caught up by the tornado and landed with a jolt, and she opens the door on Technicolor. Now, the movie coming out in 1939, this was, I don't know if it's the first movie in Technicolor, but it was
one of them.
shocking that
Yeah.
it switched from black and white to full, vibrant color. And I was writing this book to a large extent when there was no full, vibrant color. And yes, please, I wanted to go over the rainbow. I wanted to go anywhere. I wanted that sense of joy and wonder and imagination, and that was very important to me in to recreate it, which is why, oddly, the book is set in Ireland, because it's the Emerald City is always Dorothy's destination. I originally was going to set it in Seattle because that's
Also, Emerald City. Yes.
nicknamed the Emerald City.
Yes.
And it didn't feel far away enough. It didn't feel magic enough. It didn't feel big enough.
Wow.
So we ended up at Trinity College, Dublin.
I loved that. I mean, I think, and so have you ever been?
Yeah. Okay. So not. I mean, during the opening parts, no. And if it weren't for Bernice M. Murphy, and Bernice, if you're listening to this, thank you, thank you, thank you, who is an associate professor of popular literature at Trinity College, Dublin, this book could never have been written. But so I did that. I had a subscription to the Irish Times. I lived on Google Maps. Um, I was doing all the research remotely because we could not travel. During the last stages of writing the book, we got to go to Dublin. What I did not expect was I was going to have my own Dorothy moment. That from the time we were on the bus driving into Dublin to our hotel as the sun rose, I had lived in Dee's footsteps for so long that I kept grabbing my husband's arm and going, look, there's the River Liffey. Look, we're crossing the Grand Canal. There's the church that Dorothy goes to Christmas morning. We were walking down the street to get to Trinity College where I was meeting Bernice, and there's a long wall. The campus is walled off, and I pointed over the stone wall, and I said, there's the roof of the arts building, which is where I'm going. There was this incredible sense of homecoming.
Wow.
That I completely did not anticipate. That just it was amazing. It was magical. It was great. So yes, I've been, but it was late in the process, and I almost feel that made it better.
Did you ever have to, like, did you tweak anything after having seen it?
I did. Okay, so for example, the writing program at Trinity College is in the Oscar Wilde house, and there are several Oscar Wilde houses in Dublin. It's sort of like George Washington. It's like he slept here, but the writing center is in the Oscar Wilde house, and I was using the street entrance when I wrote the book. But the faculty and students actually sort of go in through this secret entrance in the basement of the science building, which I didn't know about and wouldn't have known about until we went there. We stayed in Dee and Riti's and Tim's neighborhood of Ballsbridge. And so I had a lot of fun putting some of my favorite pubs and restaurants in the book for that reason.
I love it.
Oh. But
yeah, I love it. I mean, similar story. I think also for me, I always had this idea of writing, 3 generations of, Indian American women on the dating scene at once, because I think like one of the running themes for all of my books is how far women have come. Right, it's all about how far we've come, how we stand on the shoulders of those who've afforded us the things they didn't have, which is our mothers and our grandmothers, right? And all of that is that journey. And so I think that the modern dating scene is as as wildly tangible a place to kind of snapshot that journey as anything, right? Because how my grandmother chose romantic partners and how my daughter does it is literally on 2 different, universes. Yes, it is in terms of, just in terms of, it's a whole different paradigm. So I kind of had this idea, as you know, sitting in my head for a very, very long time. But I know that during the pandemic, I consumed so much comedy. Like it was a thing that really kept me going. Just stand up, shows that are funny, literally like movies, Bollywood and Hollywood that I grew up, falling off the couch laughing at. And so I knew that I would not have survived in quite as healthy a way if I hadn't consumed so much humor, and so then I became almost obsessed with being able to do that, being able to meaningfully bring laughter into people's lives, and personally for me,
well, some of the misadventures, the romantic misadventures that you tackle I'm thinking particularly of the Vibrant Years.
Yes.
Uh,
I mean, I laugh out loud when I read those scenes, and my husband is so amused. He's like, "Are you laughing at your own? Are you laughing at your own book?" I'm like, "Yes, it's so funny." And so, that's a huge win. But it was very mindful and very conscious to sit down and to learn how the people who were making me laugh were able to do it, even when at the heart of it was, was pain, was emotional, disconnection and discomfort and all of that. How the true comedy that really made me laugh was based in so much truth and all of that. So I actually broke that stuff down that other people were doing. So it was very conscious for me. Just like traveling and leaving this confinement was conscious for you, I think, with Dee. So, but I think at the end of just when we were first allowed to travel, another couple and my husband and I, because we live in Chicago, and I was not born to live in the cold, and starting now, which is November until April, I try to be as minimally miserable as I can, but I do not always succeed. So we're always trying to run off, to warmer places, and so we rented this little they rented a place in Naples, Florida, where our friend has family, which is his uncle and aunt, who are now, I think, like late 70s, early 80s, who moved here in their 20s probably, right? So we're talking moving here in like the 60s, and and have done really well for themselves, lived their life in Chicago, and then now we're living in this very fancy condo community for retirees in Naples, Florida. So the idea of and I'm always fascinated as an immigrant of by being in spaces where you're not expected, right? Being in spaces where nobody else expects you, right? Where you stick out, and then making that journey of making that space your own, kind of there's this, it's such a complicated, just existing in spaces is such a complicated thing when you're an immigrant. And there's great space for humor, there's great space for kind of trying to understand humanity in general, because how we treat somebody who is different from us says so much about us and the world we live in and all those things. So it was such a, so I think when I visited them, and the idea of them, this this Indian American couple from who moved here when America was completely different and India was completely different and the world was completely different. So that it was such a layered, wonderful thing to see them in that bubble, and the level of comfort and discomfort that they brought to it. So then I was like, okay, she's, and the idea of an Indian woman who is very comfortable with her, with her beauty and her sexuality showing up in this space, and basically just turning everything upside down because she's such a hottie, and and just what is her story, right? And who she is, other than this this wild grandma who turns all the all the other seniors in this facility, their definition of the world upside down, was kind of boom. Like I was there and I was like, okay, I have the story, but this is the setting for it.
Well, I think one of the things I loved about that is not only how you showed all the facets of Bindu's character, and you showed different aspects of romantic interactions through the three generations of grandmother, mother, and granddaughter. But the other thing I liked was the way that you played with the dynamic between those three generations, because that's something that was important to me, both in Dorothy's book and, of course, when I was doing the Little Women retellings, is that mother-daughter dynamic, which you and I are now, of course, experiencing as sandwich generation people.
Absolutely, and I think in Dorothy Gale too. I think one of my favorite things, is 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 Dorothy's origin story, right? Because she has, here is this woman of like immense immense softness and empathy, and wanting to live in the world and never causing damage, right? Her whole, like, she presents as somebody who is tiptoeing through life because she doesn't want to be a nuisance to anyone else. And her journey to kind of, you know, retaining her empathy and retaining her kindness, but not needing to tiptoe, like really coming into her own, right? Like that story. But the origins of it was because there's this whole thing we're raised with, right? As women, if we don't do our jobs as mothers, then we are going to cause lifelong trauma in our children, right? Which will then, you know, put that trauma out into the world and all of that. Like, we were taught that you had to be a good mother because the repercussions are the destruction of your children and your family and all of that,
and society
at large, right? And I think that we have we both write these women whose mothers have done things that have caused this lifelong trauma, right? And that's such a complicated place to be, because what they were teaching us is not entirely unfactual, but the lens of it is that we can be no more than that, right? Not the lens of it is you do what you have to do, and then each generation is stronger if you do it without apology, right? And so that piece of Dee's history, talk about that. I think motherhood, and also when you talk about her mother, her birth mother, it becomes impossible not to talk about Auntie M, right? And the whole thing. So that was kind of one of my favorite. I mean, there's many parts of this book, and hopefully, you know, if we talk really fast, we'll get to them. But but this piece.
I know, I was going when we first started, I said, well, we'll talk for about 45 minutes. And we're thinking, yeah, we probably can wrap up in 45 minutes. And now I'm going, yeah, this is the problem with talking to a friend. You have lots of things to say.
And we've said so many of these things already, but we still want to say them. But yeah, so tell me about Auntie M.
All right, so for me, I think there's a reason why most of the Disney princesses are orphans.
Oh my gosh.
I think.
Can I put that on a T-shirt?
Or they have, but it's true, right? They have daddies who don't get them, and their mothers are dead. And I think the reason is that when you remove that support system, that immediate, like, who's your person you call? It's often your mom. If you remove that support system, then it's, how do you navigate the world? That was an enormous challenge when I was writing Little Women, because Marmee, of course, is the source of all wisdom. And I really needed to let the girls find their own voices and find their own way. One of the reasons I adore the cover of Dorothy Gale, and since this is a podcast and not a television show, I'll simply say it shows a young woman striding on her own down what surely does look like a yellow brick road, but she's moving, and she's solitary,
and she's in Technicolor, which is lovely.
So many colors.
Yes.
So many colors. But I think that sense of who you can be when you're forced to be on your own was important. And the other thing I wanted to show was that, yes, there are issues with her birth mother that we won't necessarily go into here, but there's also the presence of M, who in some respects was everything, and in some respects was not enough. And it was really important for me. I think one of our tasks in our 20s and early 30s is to figure out all the ways our parents failed us. And the task of our 30s and maybe 40s is to forgive them and move on and figure it out, you know, to be our Disney princess selves, to move forward confidently on our own.
Yeah, and also you said something really interesting there, because we are both moms, and we are both moms of sons and daughters. So we are moms of daughters, and your daughter's in her 30s and mine's in her 20s, and we spend, and there is so much of your learned wisdom that I have, that has helped me survive motherhood, in as healthy a way as has been possible. But I think that being enough, right? Do you know anybody who has a mother that they thought was enough without having done the work to get there? Not like, every single person I know has been through a phase where they have thought their parents, but specifically their mom, wasn't exactly what they needed and wasn't enough. Because is there a way to get this absolutely right? I mean, with Dorothy, obviously, there is severe abandonment, and which stops her from seeing the person who's actually there.
Right.
So because when a person is abandoned, then that projection becomes a part of who you are, right? That you are always abandoned, and especially when it's your mother, and I think all mother-daughter stories, or all mother-child stories, are, carry the hint of abandonment, because we have to disconnect. This is another thing you and I talk about so much, right? The stepping back, because until you orphan your child yourself in ways that are like, she can never grow into her Disney princess self, which is such a terrible thing. I'm going to walk back from that awful metaphor, but letting go, right? Letting them be all alone is the hardest thing. As a mother, it should be easy, because we're all like, oh my God, how long do I have to do this? And yet when it is, letting them be and find their sea legs, and stop them from being perpetual toddlers, that is such a part of motherhood, where you have to step back and abandon them almost so they can stand by themselves. And it's just such a complicated relationship, which as storytellers is fantastic, because we're going to be writing stories forever because of it. I'm joking.
I think the other part of it that's interesting is that and we know this as mothers and we know this as daughters, is your parents tend to see you as the child they knew. And one of the things that we both write about, because we, come out of the romance genre, and even though we're not writing strictly in the romance genre anymore, we have strong romantic subplots or developments in our novels, is you want ultimately for your protagonist, and for your daughters, and for your sons as well, to be with the person who sees them not as the child that you raised or knew, but as the best version of their adult selves that they can be.
Yes, for that we have to abandon them. Coming back to no, but having said that, you're so now that's that perfect segue, Virginia, because a couple things that, so Lies and Other Love Languages, which is my book that just came out, and Fairy Tale Life of Dorothy Gale, both do a thing which I never thought I would write a love triangle, because love is such a two people choosing each other thing for me. That I think one of the things that kind of caused me to explore this story was, how would that look like? Was actually exploring what infidelity means, and is it a one thing? Because I was always teased, I think, on our dear friend Barbara O'Neill, always laughs at my almost archaic view of, the absolute. It's an absolute trigger for me. Cheating is, completely, you cannot write a character who I deem worthy of my respect if you show them cheating, right? And that's just like a thing that I have, a deep conditioning I have. And so I wanted to explore that and see the various conditions, and what it ended up giving me is this really interesting triangle, which is a thing
which we discussed while you were writing.
Yes, until we were blue in the face. And I think we're both in marriages that we kind of discuss with each other a lot, and all of that, having said that, I kind of, did you ever think you would, is this the first time you've written a love triangle? Because I couldn't tell between, Sam and Tim, that
Tim, Tim
Tim,
Woodman. How can you guess?
how can I forget?
Oh,
And he's one of my favorite heroes ever. So,
oh,
tell me.
So when I started, I didn't know who she was going to end up with either. In fact, I suspected it was going to go the other way in my early noodling around with the
Oh,
book.
I would have killed you. I would not have allowed that to happen. My version of that story.
But you can see it. I mean,
Yeah.
they are both really attractive possibilities. And since I am writing a younger woman, I think she's 25, 27. I have to check my notes. Um, I think we're figuring things out, right? She's figuring out who she wants to be. And part of that is who can she be with and and I think this is true in real life as well. I mean, I'm with the same man for 45 years, so obviously not only did I choose him, but I continue to choose him. But I think that there are other choices that are available to you while you're figuring yourself out. And in the course of writing the book, as I got to see her, and as she got to know herself, it was who else saw her. There's something when I teach classes about writing romance, I talk about the vision of the beloved in the eyes of the lover. So you want someone who sees things in you that maybe other people don't see, who appreciates things in you that maybe other people don't appreciate. And perhaps most importantly, if you're writing about a long-term relationship, is someone who challenges you to become the best version of yourself. So I think that's true in marriage, and I think it's true in fiction. And so the exciting part about writing this book in particular, and I actually am doing, I'm working right now on a reimagining of Anne of Green Gables, where I'm dealing with the same kind of thing. There are two possibilities. There are two roads. Which one are you going to take?
Yeah.
And you explored that deeply in Lies and Other Love Languages.
Yeah, and lies in other love languages, it had more to do with, you believe something about yourself your whole life. And then are there situations in which all of that gets jeopardized, right? And then what is that in terms of character judgment, you know, what does that say about us, right? Not in the eyes of the world, but about ourselves, because so much of this has to do with, because being seen, right? I think the heart of being loved is being seen. So no matter whether it is in your closest friends, that thing they say, right? Like, why these two people, like, when you're like cosmic dust, right? Why do two particles? And I think it has to do with nothing but us wanting to be seen a certain way, so the people who see us that way immediately catch our. So in the end, we're all just great big narcissists, I guess, because we have an image of ourselves. So long as you're at least self-actualized enough to have a realistic image of yourself or who you want to be. So the people who see you as that are the people you gravitate toward. That's my general, friendship and love life philosophy. But having said that, you've said this before, having more than one good choice. I don't think, again, the journey of women over time has been so much about these are just the darn choices we have, and you're going to make the best possible one in that moment, right? This was the life of my grandmother. This was, at this point I have no choice. I am in this situation because I have, this is my, this is what the world has given me, right? So for us, when we're writing, and we're writing aspirationally about how we want the world to be, then having women have several good choices, I think, is a lot about that, and the power that gives you,
Well, going back to your Austen retellings, we have not made Charlotte Lucas the hero. She saw her choices
And she, yeah.
and she made one, which was in its own way empowering, except now the more time Collins spends in the garden, the better.
The better.
And
Yeah.
I do think we want our women to have choices. And I also think right now, I want to say this somewhat carefully. I think women need choices.
I would
Women,
say it totally uncarefully. We.
I think women need choices.
Damn straight. Yeah.
I think women need voices, and I think women need power.
And I think the third piece of that, sorry, I'm interrupting
No,
you,
no.
is kind of the piece, right? Because we do have much more choice than we've had through the history of women, right? But this idea that, because we were told that won't make your life easier. And you're absolutely right. It doesn't make our life easier, but it makes our life more authentic. It gives us more power. And men have always had so much choice. Nobody has said, oh, but let's make your life easier by giving you fewer choices, because you poor thing, you don't have the ability to make them. Because we absolutely have the ability to make them. And do we mess up? Sure. Does it make our life terribly complicated? Sure. But it makes it the life we want to live. And I think that's what it is about. It's about power to live your own life in the way you want, not saying, oh, I have two bad choices, which is the least worse, and being Charlotte Lucas. And I think you're absolutely right? And she is much more realistic as a character for many, many generations of women than Elizabeth Bennet. Not many women got to say to the richest man in England, that sorry, you're not.
That was a crappy proposal. So the answer
Sorry.
is no.
I choose destitution over a person I don't think deserves me is aspirational writing, and it's wonderful, and that's why it makes us starry-eyed to this day, because we all want to be that person. We don't want to be the person who's saying, do I want to be stuck as a spinster in my father's house all my life, or do I want my own home and a husband who is like very annoying, but I can think of him as mildly annoying and I'll be fine, and women were doing that. It's not unrealistic, but it's not who we all wanted to be, and it's not what got us here today. And and I think that there's absolutely something to be said about that. But talking about good choices, I think we can't finish this unless we've talked about men in literature, right? Because for all these years we were seeing how women were written by men in literature, and
The male gaze.
the male gaze, the male definition of a good woman, which we all have in some way, tried to live up to. The sacrificial, living for everybody else, smiling more, font of kindness, all of that, the thing that was, part of all the women written. And we were taught to, we had to break from that conditioning, and we still are every single day. And the opposite of that, I think, is true. We're often, especially in when we write romance, we are accused of doing this thing which is unrealistic expectations, which when you look at the men we write, we're like expecting somebody to be a good human being who treats you well, and wants to give you orgasms. Is that unrealistic? I mean,
Well, it's interesting that you brought up that you brought it up that way, because the trigger for the action in the fairy tale life of Dorothy Gale is actually she gets involved with an adjunct faculty member who happens to be a best-selling author at her writing program at KU, and he pillories her in a novel. So the book starts with him defining her, and so that's the tornado of humiliation and heartbreak that sends her across the Atlantic Ocean to Ireland. Um, and the entire book, while it's about her romantic choices and it's about her personal choices and it's about her relationship with her dead mother, her Auntie M, and her younger sister, it's actually about her defining herself. And so it was important for me when I looked at the men in her life, or the men who were going to come into her life, that they be different, um, that they be worthy, that they also be flawed and have goals. And one of the advantages, of course, when you're doing a reimagining is you're writing about characters who are archetypes to a certain extent. And so they come with goals built in. So one of them wants a brain, one of them lacks a heart. Uh, and so I guess ultimately Dorothy is forced to confront the question of, do you want a man who has a brain or a man who has a heart?
Oh my gosh. And then we find that they both have both. They just have to look
Well,
for
I mean,
it.
that's and I don't think that's a fantasy either.
At all. At all. And I think, writing within, I think this is true across cultures, but writing in writing in the Indian culture, I think it was really important. And Veer, who is who's the husband in this book, is is they get to, he's a writer, and she's a advice columnist who has seen great success as a self-help guru and an influencer. And so she ends up becoming this is not, when they start isn't where how their life is supposed to be, but it ends up where she becomes the breadwinner, and he becomes the homemaker. And it's easy for him. Like, this is a man who proudly, likes to nurture, likes to cook, likes a beautiful house, all of that, right? I know a lot of men like that, but I think putting men on paper who own that, and she does, she loves all of that, obviously, but she has a hard time, publicly, for at the beginning, publicly, like, getting behind that, because her mom is constantly making the little jibes about, how she lies about the fact that her husband makes more than her and things like that. And there is a moment in the book when he says, if you don't correct her, you are actually saying what she's saying. And so even women, as we have better choices, bigger choices, then the onus of allowing the men that same space starts to, that's where I think equity starts, is where everybody kind of is taking care of everybody else without losing themselves. And I think when we write these men who aren't in D, I think that both men are completely okay with D exactly how she is today. And there is nowhere in their language or in their inner dialogue that they want her to be a different D. And I think that that's, again, the great human dream, right? To be accepted for exactly who we are. And whatever journey toward being better is entirely internal and fueled by us, rather than by seeing lack in someone's view of us. And so I think this great thing about Sam and Tim is exactly that, is that the way D is today, she's the D they want. And I think that that's beautiful to see. To have two of those choices is so great.
I love that. And of course, I enjoy the fact that we both have written men who can cook.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yes. And we're both married to men who can cook really, really well.
And we're both
so,
married to men who can
yeah.
cook. Although I will say that Richie prepares your butter chicken.
I mean, of course.
Is that
I love it.
For us?
Yes,
Is that
I
a
think
good place for us to stop, I think?
I think we can start. Yeah.
Sonali, thank you so much for doing this with me today. And I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Or later today, Virginia. This has been so fabulous, and we could just go on talking, but I genuinely think and I love all of your books, but I genuinely think that this is my favorite of your books up to this point, thus far, as they say. And it is because I think that balance of joy and empowerment and escape, and just good old fashioned sense and adventure is like so alive on these pages that I truly loved it. I think you've done an amazing job, and thank you so much for letting me talk to you about it.
Well, that really touches my heart because you know how much I admire both your keen insight into character and the exuberance of your writing. And so, yeah, when you pay me a compliment, I'll just go ahead and print it and slap it up on my bulletin board for free.
Thank you.
But thank you for this
But yes, thank
today.
you. And thank you, everyone who tuned in.
Thank you for listening. Please visit alwaysauthors.com to learn about our other episodes. Always Authors is an exclusive production of Atomic Focus Entertainment.